and we have an other unaccounted miles. If there's any difference between those two numbers, that's the miles difference. And we're looking at that comparison. That comparison, there's another tab, and you guys have probably seen this graph tab on that form. On the right-hand side, we have a amount over and under projected. We want our projected miles to be within 5% of our actual. This is kind of balancing out our prediction. We have a prediction and we have our actual. We want them to be pretty close. It means we're tracking records. If they're not, we need to figure out why. We need to look for any type of errors. And when you are above or below that 5%, it's kind of a flag for us. If we can't identify a reason why we're high or low, it may flag us to do a more in-depth review of your state reports.
Now, one problem with that is it also causes people to have inefficiency. If you have kids in a district that is rural and you do not have them on a PM route, you can't control whether they're going to ride or they're not going to ride. But do you make that bus go 2 miles out of its way when that child's not riding just because they ride? You know, if you have this child miss 10 days of school, or it's a high schooler and they miss half the year riding because they drive, they're not missing school, but I mean, do you want our buses to run that route even though that child's not on there and put on those extra miles on a bus they don't have to? 2 miles adds up really fast.
So the question we just had was, there's a lot of changes in transportation if you don't have a student that rides at the end of the route, whether to meet the state report, you run that route, or you be efficient for your district. And so we'll actually talk about that question in our discussion section coming up in a couple.
I've been fighting that one. Ours is always underpredicted because we feel that is a waste of resources, and so we hold our drivers on those occasions. But we just have to know if we have a consistency, so if we have to make a change. But it's very difficult to project because of the distances that we are traveling.
Yeah, so good point. So we'll have a short discussion on that when we get to our discussion section. Results within 5%, that's where we've done a good job. Like I said, it's hard to account for every mile, every minute. It's stressful. I've done it for 5 years with Michelle, and it's a challenge. You know, there's a 5% leeway, so the closer you can be, the better. You know, there's a lot of different changes that happen over the school year that make it tough. So we'll talk about those. Okay, do you guys have any questions of how the reports work together? And was that helpful for you guys? I think it's, for me, it's seeing how some of the bigger districts work. It's interesting that you guys have so many different hands involved in creating these reports. You may have one person taking care of the minutes, one person taking care of the miles, and to kind of see how everything works together. And I know your drivers are collecting data. You know, there's a lot of work that goes into these reports, and it's really exciting to see them all come together at the end and be done. So, okay. Okay. So these will be the laws and requirements section. This is a news article that came out just a couple weeks ago, said school fees. Audit finds widespread violations of Utah law by school boards. This is where USB was in the newspaper. Some of the comments said widespread violation of state law, widespread noncompliance, penalties for noncompliance, and penalties for noncompliance must be real and an active part of the school fees system. This is just kind of a reminder that we're being watched, that we're required by law to follow certain requirements and laws. And over the last 10 years since we've had an audit, there's things that, as I review the reports, we don't have in law. So, for example, our half-funded routes. I could not find a reference to a half-funded route in law anywhere. And we've been doing half-funded routes for years. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to make sure that we're following the rules correctly, and also that we do have a process for creating or modifying rules. And so we have our Transportation Advisory Committee, and we're going to be going through different scenarios. We've talked about a few of them at our North and South Directors meetings, and I've been writing those down, and so our Transportation Advisory Committee is going to be reviewing those and proposing what rules we feel need to be in law or statute so that we're following all the rules. And so this section is going to be reviewing what are the laws and requirements about filling out our fall reports and our being funded. And so we'll take, if we can, let's go around the room and let's just read one slide at a time. If you don't mind using the microphone, and you can pass if you don't want to. But I think it's a good idea that we go back to the basics and review what the laws are and what's being funded.
Approved costs means the board-approved cost of transporting eligible students from home to school to home once each day. After school routes, approved routes for students with disabilities and vocational students attending school outside their regularly assigned attendance boundary.
Eligibility for regular ed students. Elementary K through 6 is 1.5 miles from school. Secondary 7 through 12 is 2 miles from school. Measured from the middle of the public road in front of the student's home to the middle of the public road opposite the nearest entrance to the school's grounds. Private lanes, roads, etc. do not count in these measurements.
I'm missing that one. If we want to just read those.
Not really. There's one right here.
Which one, the 53A then?
Yeah.
That was on, sorry. Approved bus routes for funding purposes shall be determined on fall data collected by October 1st. Approved route funding shall be determined on the basis of the most efficient and economic routes. Due November 1st.
Oh, and we, that's my deadline, so October 1st.
The superintendent shall state transportation funds to reimburse school districts for the cost reasonably related to transporting students to and from school. The board shall define the limits of a school district's transportation cost reimbursable by state funds in a manner that encourages safety, economy, and efficiency.
One you want?
Yeah.
Student eligibility.
A student whose IEP identifies transportation as a necessary related service is eligible for transportation, regardless of distance from the school, attended by assignment of the local school board. A student who attends school for at least one half-day at a location other than the local school board designated school is not eligible for transportation for distance up to 1.5 miles.
So I wanted to ask a question on this right here. So I understand there's a couple programs in special ed where a student would be assigned to a school that focuses with the special ed students, and then maybe part of their program would have them attend a different school as part of their program. Are there any other scenarios that you guys know of that fall in line with that rule? I think the other one would be like a vocational school. Okay.
What about Head Start?
And that I'm not sure. And so is Head Start, do they attend multiple schools?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Go to an assigned school in the morning, and then in the afternoon they're assigned, they go to a Head Start program. Right.
Okay. So that's another example of a scenario that would work in that situation. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Eligible student stops. Students are responsible to get themselves to the bus stop up to 1.5 miles from their home. Alternative transportation. Identify if alternative methods of transporting students is more efficient. Students may be reimbursed for the mileage to the assigned bus stop or school. Multi-purpose vehicles are approved cost as long as the costs demonstrate efficiency.
Is there can we ask questions as we're going through this? Is there a certain formula or a certain amount of money that we should reimburse for mileage? Or
There's a minimum.
It's it's 55 cents right now. That's what the state gave.
per mile?
Per mile. But that does fluctuate every year. Like last year it was 54 cents, the year before it was 56.
Okay.
So it does fluctuate. So I just call it the first of the year and find out how much I'm paying.
This year it's 55 cents. Okay, thanks.
Is that a district or is that a state?
Sounds like it's state.
I think that's maximum for
I-
the state.
It is, but usually a district has a policy that puts it into effect. Some districts will pay more. And so you want to, I'm not sure where that's for your reimbursement, but you want to check your district.
Yeah, I think there's, as Chris mentioned, I think there's a minimum that you're required to pay, and I think there's a maximum. And each district's going to have a different amount because each district sets those prices of what they pay students or pay parents for the fee in lieu.
Is the 55 the minimum or the maximum?
56 was the maximum. Well, from what our rule said, 52 was the minimum, 56 was the maximum. So you can decide within there. The state came down to from our district and said 55 this year, so that's what I've been paying this year.
Okay. And so use those numbers from your district to identify if it's cheaper to pay fee in lieu. There's also, we always talk about, safety, efficiency, and cost. There's a lot of stops that it's more safe to have parents and students bring them to the nearest bus stop. If you have the last bus stop, there's a 5 or 10 minute with just one student on board. that's a great scenario to say, let's pay fee in lieu to eliminate any one-on-one as much as possible. So there's other options. It's not always based on what's the best efficiency. We can have other measures. We talk about safety, what's best for students and our drivers. Okay.
So what if you have a parent who will not accept in lieu of, and their child is eligible? In that scenario where you have them at the end of the route and there's just one child, what as a district can you do?
I think every scenario is a little bit different. A lot of the districts I've talked to have just said that this is what we need to offer in this situation, and there's nothing else we can do. Is how a couple districts have done it, and so it's always tough because everyone wants transportation to your doorstep, and I get those phone calls when they're not happy with what your district decides, and I get to.
I mean, basically, if they won't accept in lieu of, you transfer them curb to curb, correct? Is that what she's asking?
Yes.
Yeah.
And not always, because there are still situations where, for the efficiency, for cost, and for safety, that it's not appropriate to do that. And as long as you can back up, we can't offer a fee in lieu because of these items. You're actually following state law. You're being efficient. You're thinking about the student's safety. And costs are a portion of that. But every situation is different, so it's all got to be identified. And also, there may be some, when you do have complaints, there may be some negotiation or some leeway that you can give to help accommodate both sides. All right, the first routing software.
Is that Salt Lake City?
I could watch this for hours. Okay, that was me creating a route in under a minute. We talk about being efficient. We're looking at, how close together are our stops? How's our routing? Are we going up and down every street? So as you guys create routes, there's a lot of things that we need to look at to make sure that we're being efficient. We're looking at the student safety. And we're looking at that cost. Okay, go ahead and you want to read the next slide? And can you use that, Mike?
Okay, a bus route shall A, traverse the most direct public route, be reasonably cost effective in comparison to other feasible alternatives, provide adequate safety for students, traverse roads that are constructed and maintained in a manner that does not cause property damage, and include an economically appropriate number of students.
Yeah.
So, out in the rural areas where there's just barely a 2-lane road, and you know, have got homes that are closer than 0.3 miles together, you're talking about efficiency, but we're also talking about safety. Those kids are walking down the road in the dark to a bus stop to get on. But they're closer than 0.3 miles together. What do we do?
Yeah, that's tough. I'll tell you. When I started in Morgan, my first year I cut over 100 bus stops. I had parents calling me wanting to take away their neighbors' bus stops so they could keep theirs. You know, that we put the responsibility back on the students and the parents. And so, you know, there are hazards at every bus stop, and so it's hard to distinguish which ones are the most hazardous, even though it's a dark road, no sidewalks. I mean, we're talking about the majority of all the rural. But we also have that responsibility to be efficient. And so in our state standards, we've said stops should be 0.3 of a mile apart. So there are situations where, you know, it's not safe to. Maybe you have a canal with a bridge, and there's no sidewalks, you know, especially where that bridge is. And so there's, you know, some reasons that you would have stops closer. Although it is in our state standards 0.3 of a mile apart. So if you do have a stop that's closer, I would document why. So on your route sheet, I'd say this stop is 0.2 of a mile apart, or 1/10 because we're not making students cross a canal bridge, or, you know, things that you consider to be a big hazard. I know for me it was, you know, not only did I have parents upset at me, I had bus drivers upset at me for quite a while. And ultimately, the feedback I got after everything settled down was really good. You know, I had bus drivers that had 24 stops on their route, and we cut it down to like 11 or 10. And had drivers say, I don't know how I did it before. I now have time to use the restroom in between my 2 runs. And that actually turned out to be helpful for me. Our subs didn't have to remember as many stops. I mean, there's a lot of benefits for us, you know, following that 0.3 of a mile rule. But yeah, it's always hard to decide why it's, you know, Morgan has a lot of mountains, and a lot of the roads follow the mountain line, and so there's constantly turns and windy roads and blind corners, and, you know, there's a lot of you know, decisions that had to be made when we're looking out for the student safety. Yep. Thanks for your comment.
So I just
Marcus?
have a quick question on that then. So it's in the state standards that it has to be within that distance, but if we deem as a district that we need a stop closer than that and we document it, is that okay? Or do we need that 0.3 of a mile?
So I think where it says provide safety, be economic and efficient, you know, there are reasons that you would have a stop closer than 0.3. Okay. But I would make it so you could on your route sheet that you would have some type of documentation of the reason you decided it needed to be closer, because as we look at your route sheets, you know, we're looking at, you know, well, I have the very last section, I'll show you what we're looking at, but we are looking at how close together your stops.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess it's my turn to read. Okay, qualifying rules, route approval. Provide safety, be economic and efficient. To promote efficiency, the USOE approved minimum stop distance between stops is 0.3 of a mile. The USOE may approve shorter distances between bus stops for student safety. State Standard 2010.
A1 rules for funded routes. Qualifying for full miles minutes, at least 10 eligible regular ed students, at least 5 disabled IEP students, at least 1 wheelchair and 1 disabled student. Disabled students count as 2 students. Wheelchair students count as 4. Route runs at least 15 days during the regular school year with the same group of students. Routes run at least 10 days during the extended year summer school with the same group of students.
Qualifying for half miles bus or MPV, less than 10 eligible regular ed, 5 disabled IEP students. Minimum of 4 students total, less expensive than paying in lieu.
Okay, have fun. Minimum of 4 students total. Do they have to be qualifying students?
Yes.
Do you think that the ruling right now is K through 12? Are we going to include preschool?
Preschool, when they are considered to be disabled.
But not if it's a regular preschool program. We can't count that as a half fund.
Right. Yeah, we'll talk about that in our discussion too.
To these rules from the state superintendent on individual cases. A letter requesting exception should be sent to the state superintendent with written evidence demonstrating that no significant increased costs, less than 1% of school district's transportation budget, is incurred due to a waiver, or that students cannot be provided services consistent with the law due to transportation exigencies. Letter is due at the same time as the A1.
I don't have any examples of this yet. I talked with Von Horton in our finance department. He said there's only been a couple times that they've approved exceptions to this. So I don't have any examples of conditions that would have caused a district to have significant increase of budget by following the rules. But we do have this in place if that does happen.
Agreements and extensions. Memorandum of Understanding, MOU. If 2 or more districts enter into an agreement regarding transporting students across the district boundaries, the boards of both districts need to approve this in an open meeting and sign an MOU. This MOU must be turned into the USOE. Extensions to November 1st deadline. Must send a letter to Natalie Grange signed by your superintendent and business administrator that identifies reason for extension and the date when the report will be turned in.
Do you guys have any other questions on the laws and requirements? Okay. You know, when I got done with this slideshow, this map also reminded me of another video game. Okay, thank you. Okay, this next section is on our efficient bus routing. Just keep in mind, we just learned about all the rules and laws that apply, but there's always challenges in, especially with our rural districts, or even our city districts have some of the same issues. So I've asked Chris Hadlock to just lead this discussion. just asking about some of the questions, just on this first slide. The rest are slides from another PowerPoint that just talk about efficiency measures, and we'll briefly talk about those as well.
Okay, challenges. Who among us don't have challenges, right? We've already brought up a few, and so this is for your time to chat. Let's talk about these. Increased and decreased ridership. Is it happening? Oh my gosh, Wasatch County is becoming huge and our ridership is going up. I know Uinta is decreasing and your ridership is going down. So what are the challenges and how are you guys handling that? Well, anyway, I'll tell you mine. Ours is tough. Our buses are loaded. But I know that your buses are loaded as well. We can talk about lack of drivers in the seat. That's creating a loaded school bus. With loaded school bus, there's problems with discipline and handling the students and where do they sit. How about seating charts that we've been asked to do? You can't handle those when you have 200 kids on a bus and who shows up when. So, yeah, let's put you on the spot. What are you doing with the decrease of ridership?
And can you use the microphone, please? So just a reminder, so everyone can hear, please use your mic.
Okay, we have had to eliminate some routes to start this school year. We've tried to merge a lot of routes, shuffle kids. That's pretty much, I don't know, our counts are looking better this year than what they were last year. We're trying to become more efficient and get more kids on them. And so now we have buses that are really full and some that are still really light. And so we just keep doing a great shuffle of stops and kids.
You'll regret giving me the mic. Indulge me for a minute. I went to a conference once, and it was on making maps and solving how to enter and exit schools. And so somebody come up to the front and they said, "This is my challenge." And they drew it on the board, and then we turned it over to 50 people to tackle that challenge. We had some great ideas as they came back. But the man at the board who had presented the challenge, at that point, nothing would work. Nope, we can't do that. Nope, we can't do that. We can't do that. And I giggled because I thought, we've helped you solve your problem, but you're unwilling to listen. Mm-hmm. And so as districts go through different challenges, economic growth or decrease or whatever that might be, yours as far as, do we take the one student out the 2 miles when he only rides 50% of the time? How do we document that? I think it's important that we listen to one another and have an open mind to realize that, and I've already heard it at this table, well, not my district. Well, my district has to do this. Well, mine has it this way. And that may be true, but if we close our minds and we don't listen to what someone else is doing and think outside the box, we're never going to really route efficient, right? Because there's more than one way to skin the cat. There's more than one way.
Yeah.
What was it? The people that are after the animals now, I've just offended everyone.
It's okay. One thing, because we're in the same situation with declining enrollment. So one way we actually resolved this issue was with our district, we take a bus down, collect all the students, bring them to a school, and transfer the secondary onto another bus where they rally to the next school, and then they transfer, like the high school students will transfer at that secondary school, all onto one bus and take them, versus running 4 buses to the high school. We only run the one bus to the high school, or 2 buses, but they all come and they do transfer.
That's what we do. We transfer all of our high school students. We pick up middle school and high school as one and then transfer them up. A lot of transferring.
Yeah. Kids are amazing. They actually can keep it all straight.
They're quick.
That sounds, they can run UTA, absolutely.
Yeah.
That sounds very efficient. So let's talk about seasonal. I'm not sure what seasonal is.
So with seasonal in Morgan, for example, as soon as winter hit, I had about 20% more drivers. Kids were driving themselves to school until parents didn't want them driving on the freeway to get to school when there was bad weather.
So did that affect your routing? Did you add routes during a rough season, a snow season?
Seems like we were always making changes.
Right.
Removing stops from one route and moving them to another route was something we did throughout the year. You know, and you know, times when we have drivers counting. I'm at 83 students. You know, we're looking for always looking for backup plans. Who can help pick up their next stop?
Right.
And you know, and it changes.
Yes.
If weather's good, you know, we were good. So.
Well, and it seems like that just falls into the next one with sports. As kids come and go from different teams, it fluxes with your bus load and kind of messes with what we do and making it exactly the same every day. I think that something in our district we've said is this is a living thing, and it changes. It changes daily. After school programs, do we have anybody in the room that are running after school programs?
After school buses. Oh, yeah.
Like a late run
bus, like
Late
after
bus.
football
Okay.
practice, the buses go home. See, that doesn't happen in a lot of districts, so if you can share with that, any
Well, we just
efficiencies.
got all of the high schools that we have a couple after-school buses. We have them at our junior highs also. We just have them at various times in the evening. Yeah, and this is in Salt Lake.
And a challenge here, it says half-day kindergarten. We've run half-day kindergarten forever until this year in Wasatch, and now we have all-day kindergarten, and there's only, I can probably count them on one hand in our district, that parents have chose not to do all-day kindergarten. And that has created a huge problem for us, because now what do I do with my preschoolers? So I'm running preschool buses, who I'm finding out are non-qualifying. Can't count your preschoolers. So unfunded routing. Sure I can't have half funds? Keep thinking.
If we change the law.
Keep going. Severe multiple schools. I think that's Granite, right?
Serve.
How about bell times? How are we creating bell times?
Yeah.
I actually sat next to someone yesterday in a meeting who was from another district and was trying to explain to me how they were coming up with their bell times and how they could run their subs. And I thought that's pretty creative in how they were doing that. So if anybody's got anything to suggest there or give us some ideas, because that is a challenge. We're in the education business, not in the transportation business, so where do you make that call? And rural versus urban. Everybody in this room has one or the other, and everybody has different ways of doing rural versus urban. And again, thinking outside the box and listening to someone else who might have a suggestion to help you out in your area. Anyone want to talk on those? Back to you, Ron.
I guess I have a question about the half-day kindergarten. I wonder, so going back to the half funding, so you get half funding if you have 4 kids, and that's almost a full bus. I mean, so this is kind of for you too, Ron. So for full funding for a special ed bus, it's 5 kids. Half funding, it's 4. Can we make it 3? You know, is there any way we can just talk about getting it closer to a half the size? Because with our pre-K, special ed pre-K, a lot of times we are right around 2-3 kids, and we've got multiple programs around the city, and we have to get creative with these half day in terms of we'll have one bus driver maybe take home kids and pick up at the same time, but to be able to have that be fully fundable, we talked on the phone. I remember basically we're picking up to take home, but then we're picking up the kids first to take in, and then we're delivering the kids home. So you got to get creative with that. So I'm just wondering if there's any way that there's for special ed buses to talk about maybe having just even a little bit of movement on the number for half funding. Is that possible?
So changing the laws, you know, are possible. Right now, there's nothing in law that talks about half funding at all, and so, you know, we're going to be working to keep that half funding. Ultimately, you know, Martin mentioned that he got creative and he extended his riding time on all his pre-K students in order to have a route that was funded. So, you know, one of our rules is anytime that the route zeroes out, has 0 students on, you create a new route. So Martin's picking up kids, following the rules, keeping students on the bus longer to be able to have a half-funded route. And, Chris, I know you're
I'm just
in that
reaching.
same...
Does that make sense how we do that?
It does, but you have, like he said, you've got to be careful at when that route stops and starts, because once you reach a school, you're starting again. And so serving multiple schools, that might be a thing. Also, remember that just because they're preschoolers does not mean that they are special ed. They have
We only do kids with an IEP.
Yep.
That's what we bus. Yeah.
I don't know how to turn this on.
Yep.
It's the red.
Oh, I'm looking for red down here. Okay, thanks, Ron. I'm like, where's the red ring? So maybe you could offer daycare service to parents and just get a handful of kids to ride all day.
There we go. Have the daycare be on the bus?
Yeah. Stack lunches.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, so that's definitely some challenges we have with our routes. So, I think, we discussed a little bit about that at our directors meeting, and so this type of information and feedback, we'll be talking with our Transportation Advisory Committee and trying to decide what's best for our transportation.
Hey, Ron. Back to Chris's story about the guy on the whiteboard, that I feel like sometimes our A1 reporting and the 5% is that guy at the whiteboard, right? There's a solution, but is the 5%, I don't know, you had like a thumbs up, but really hitting the 5% doesn't necessarily mean a positive thing. That means your miles came out close to what you predicted, but if you are being creative and flexible in solving these problems, you should vary from your plan more than 5% if you're not being limited, right? If you're not keeping yourself in a box. Is that a fair perspective?
Nebo School District, I've been talking with them about their reports. They weren't quite within that 5%, but they made a transition from paying drivers, make sure I got this right, you paid for their time and then you've switched to a contract time, so pay for the route. And so one of the big discussions is that they felt that they became over 5% more efficient because drivers aren't taking the last kid home or driving the route to match the reports. And so now they're saving miles, they're saving minutes. And so anytime you are more efficient, you have a bigger chance of being outside that 5%. Or one thing we don't have in our challenges is, what about construction? You got a bridge being repaired and you're forced to take the exit that's past your stop and backtrack. That adds miles and minutes. If it's a 4-month project, that's going to add up. Even construction projects that are within the boundaries of the school that divert every single bus 2-3 times a day is going to affect your accuracy. And those are things we don't have a lot of control over. A bigger project, you might be able to say, like with the bridge, that we're going to be doing this route for 40 school days, and the remaining school days we're doing this route if you want to break it up to be more accurate. But it's always hard to decide.
Ron, your snapshot for the year, you're saying this is October 1, and that's your snapshot. If you look at these variables right here, that tells you right there you're not going to be as accurate because, hey, my sports might be different in the fall than they are in the spring. And so when you say accurate and paying off of these funds, maybe that's something you should take back to the advisory committee and see if there's a better way to take a snapshot than one day.
Yeah. And I think that's a good comment. Our Transportation Advisory Committee, we're actually trying to get a database set up as well for our transportation. It'd be nice to be able to just do the reports online, be able to update them and have some better data if you have a significant change. But that's a good comment. Do you guys have any other questions or anything else you want to discuss about challenges you guys are facing?
Can we go back to half day in preschool for just a minute, and where you're taking home and picking up, and we do some of that? What is the average time that you have those students on the bus?
So we don't have any kids on our buses so the longest maybe 55 minutes.
Okay.
For any kind of special ed kid, but to be more specific, so we have half-day programs at the same school in the morning and then in the second half of the day, and so we're picking. So the morning group, we're having a driver pick up 2 kids from the school to take them home. But like Ron said, as soon as you let them off, that's the end of the route.
Right.
And so we pick up those 2 kids at school, then we go and pick up 3 that are going into the afternoon, then we drop off the 2, then we take in the 3 in. So those 5 make that a fully fundable route. I don't know if it's in the best interest of the kids, but it gets us the funding that we need to get the kids to and from school. So
okay.
But yeah, our maximum here in the city, sometime just on a rare occasion we have over 50 minutes, but usually it's under 50 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So these next few slides are from efficiency PowerPoint that Merrill created. Talks about bus capacity, and it's the manufacturers determine the capacity of the school bus. Students are different sizes. Ultimately the capacity is how many students can you fit in the bus comfortably in the seat without being in the aisleway. Special needs, we use the capacity listed divided by the original number of seats and adjust the design capacity for the loss of each seat. We add 4 seats back in for a wheelchair position.
So where's that capacity list?
Let's see.
Just so they know there's a reference to go to.
So it's on our website. Our website. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Sorry. And you're talking about the utilization chart. So this is on our website. So transportation now has a category on the State Board of Education website, pupil transportation. Before we were under financial operations. So we have this plan bus utilization chart. Gives a kind of a matrix here of different size students, different size buses, and about how many students would fit on that bus as you guys plan your routes. So you can see right here, if we have 84 passenger bus and you're hauling kindergarten, you can put 105 kindergartners on the bus. So these would be your maximums, right? High school students on 84 capacity. 58 students. So this is a good resource as you're planning your routes. Go ahead.
Ron, I got that chart in front of me, and it says it's from October 1999. Is this an old chart? Because, now we've got propane buses in here that aren't 84 buses, they're 81 buses. So they're different. So this chart really needs to be updated.
So we have pretty close numbers. So your closest to your 81 would be our 78. So you would add in just one more seat, and try to pick a number that's between these two on the capacity. But yes, this is an older sheet. Go ahead.
Wouldn't it have anywhere on here disabled or wheelchair capacities, special needs buses, or no, it's a preschool on there?
Right. Yeah, preschool, you could fit 4 to a seat if they didn't need to have any, star seats or.
Or in our case, even though they're small and can fit 3 to a seat with the infant car restraint, you can only fit 2, so there's lots of variables there.
Yeah, when we talk about seat belts, if you have a larger student, that larger student may overlap some seat belts. So in the past, you could fit a larger student and 2 smaller students, 3 across in a seat, and we may not be able to once you have seat belts. So there's.
This is the chart we use when filling out our report, correct?
Right. So or to aid you in creating routes. And if you have a team full of football players, even your sports, your trip buses, you're going to have a different number of students. Your capacity is going to be different. Yeah, so it's a guideline. I think a tool to help you guys create routes that are more efficient. But I think one of our biggest efficiency measures right now is our driver shortages. It's causing districts to be more creative. Trying to run the routes as efficient as they can because we're short-handed. Okay. So, staggered bell times. We briefly talked about this. The idea of servicing, elementary or high school first, and then middle school, and then elementary, and having those staggered bell times. Routing efficiency development. I'm just going to briefly say there's different softwares available. It's really challenging. Our routes change so often. How many are using routing software here? So we have a majority. Yeah. GPS. Are you guys utilizing GPS in your districts? So we have a most. GPS is great for optimizing routes and time and distances. It observes where buses are traveling, where drivers are stopping. Ensures route compliance. You can track the driver if there's questions. And I think a few of them can actually export data to your A1 report. We'll briefly talk about driver audits. Verifying that the drivers who are collecting the data are reporting accurate data. So there's a couple ways to verify that. You can using GPS, following drivers, riding along with drivers, even you can probably use Google Maps and do some measurements there. Any other thoughts on that? Okay. Being efficient, we talk about, have our well-trained certified bus technicians, well-trained certified bus drivers. We're looking at alternative fuels. We recently went to Herb, to Jordan School District, and went to their celebration of their new CNG buses. Herb, you want to take just a second and talk about the savings that's helped your district with?
Yeah, the idea of using alternative fuels is beginning
Can you,
We use natural gas buses. A lot of the other districts are beginning to use propane buses. One of the benefits of natural gas is the cost of fuel is significantly cheaper than the other fuel types. Because we have our own fueling station and we compress our own natural gas, we're paying somewhere between 50 cents and $1 per gallon for our fuel, and then we get a 50-cent rebate through the IRS for each gallon of fuel that we use in our buses. And so there are some months when our fuel costs us nothing at all. And what's that?
How many miles the gallon?
About the same as a diesel bus, somewhere between 7 and 9. It's about the same, very similar. But, if you calculate, just to do some simple math, let's say that your buses average 12,000 miles per year. We average just a little bit more than that. And let's just say that you're getting 6 miles per gallon, just to make the math simple. So if you're going 12,000 miles in a year and you get 6 miles per gallon, you're consuming 2,000 gallons of fuel a year. So if you're using diesel in those buses and you're paying $3.50 a gallon for diesel, 2,000 gallons, you're spending $7,000 in fuel for that bus. When we're driving one of our natural gas buses, and let's say that it's when natural gas, we're paying about $1 a gallon with the 50-cent rebate, we drive the same, or use the same 2,000 gallons of fuel, and if we're paying 50 cents a gallon, we're spending $1,000 a year on our fuel compared to $7,000 per year if it's a diesel bus. So we're saving easily $6,000 per year per bus, and we have 105 buses, so we're saving almost $700,000 a year in fuel costs with our natural gas buses. Of course, the buses do cost a little bit more up front, but it really only takes 3 or 4 years to get that money back, especially with grants that are available for alternative fuel buses right now. Those grants have more than covered the incremental cost between a diesel bus and a natural gas bus the last few years. And so we have instant fuel savings, and we're making money on the buses. Their performance is similar. Maintenance costs are similar. It's just costing a lot less money. And what people like to hear is that we're doing something for the environment. The fact is, clean diesel buses probably their emissions are as clean as natural gas or propane buses. So the real deal is fuel savings costs, which are significant.
What's the cost for your fuel station?
Well, and that's an excellent question, and it wouldn't be cost efficient for a school district that only had one natural gas bus to spend that. But where we have 100 buses, that adds up in a hurry. Our compressor cost us about $260,000 when we bought it. But with the 100 buses that we're running off of that compressor, we more than make that up in a year.
How far can you go on a tank?
Natural gas buses, we figure that you could probably go about 300 miles on a fill-up, but we've never encouraged our drivers to take them beyond 250. And with the availability of infrastructure throughout the state, we can really take our natural gas buses anywhere we need to go. And certainly it's the same thing with propane. You can drive them just about anywhere, and there's an opportunity to refuel. Marcus?
Is that a rebate you were talking about? Is that only for CNG, or does that apply to propane as well?
It would apply to propane as well. It's for any alternative fuel, and you apply for that through the IRS. Oddly enough, I'm not sure why it goes through them, but that's who we file it with. Keep in mind that because it goes through the IRS, that probably no one in this room will be able to figure out how to do it, so you have to have an accountant that can figure out how to do it. But once you do it the first time, then it's really easy the second go around. And I think that rebate's been available for like the last 6 or 7 years.
What about mechanics working on CNG buses?
Question is, what about mechanics working on CNG buses? Yeah, there's not a huge difference. I'm not a mechanic, but I'm just being told that often we hire mechanics to work on our buses that might have had a lot of experience with gasoline engines, and natural gas is a gasoline engine. There are a few things that are different, but they're not significantly different. I don't know how much effort you put into or worrying about the difference between diesel and propane when you decided to buy those. There are a few things that you have to learn how to do, but it's the learning curve isn't so impossible that your mechanics can't do it.
Yeah, our mechanic, when we bought our propane buses, he checked it out and he went to Bryson. Bryson was willing to send them back east to get some general training, but he said they're basically a Ford engine, and he said they're not that difficult to learn a few of the changes on the mechanics, and he said they're a lot less maintenance than a diesel. So he's kind of excited to see how it is to work on them if he needs to and when he needs to. So
yeah, the frequency, the interval between services is longer with propane or natural gas buses. You don't have to do a service nearly as often. Understanding the challenge that some school districts, their mechanics have a meltdown if all you buy is Thomas buses and you decide to buy an International once, and your mechanics are going to have a meltdown, and the engines are exactly the same. So in that case, your mechanics might have a little bit of a struggle if you decided to bring on a propane bus or a natural gas bus. But there shouldn't be an issue, but sometimes they make it an issue.
Is there still a life cycle for the tanks that have to be changed out?
Yeah, there is. When they started making natural gas buses, well, we've been buying natural gas buses for about 20 years. Initially, the tanks were only certified for 15 years, and you can't recertify them. You have to replace the tanks after that period of time. All of the tanks now are 20 years. So unless you're driving your buses longer than 20 years, it's really not something you need to worry about. But that is, and it used to be more of an issue when it was only 15 years. But not so much anymore, because it's rare that we drive a bus longer than 20 years. So when they get to the point where, we've had some buses whose tanks would expire in January of 2019. We just surplused those buses at the beginning of the school year, because we can still sell them then. If we waited until after January, we wouldn't even be able to sell them, because the tanks can't be recertified. Good question.
Okay. Thanks, Herb. A couple other efficiencies, cameras. help with behavior, although they take someone to monitor the cameras and the maintenance on the cameras. Also good to protect the driver, ensure driver compliance. Idle reduction, there's been a few districts that have recently done some things for their idle reduction. We have laws in place. We do training on idle reduction. We have the diesel-fired heaters. Granite, you just put on a whole bunch of the, if I understand correctly, it's a heater pump system, and so it actually allows you to run the coolant through the hot engine and keep the heaters circulated with warm coolant and be able to run the heaters when the engine's not running. So that's another technology that's new. You guys have any other questions in our discussion period? Okay, let's take a short break. We have a break room downstairs with some vending machines if you're interested. We have ice down there, and the restrooms just outside the door. Thank you. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. Let's talk about route sheets. This is really our data collection process. I know we always have drivers helping us gather data. We use GPS. We use a lot of different ways of gathering this data, but we'll go through what data we need to collect with the route sheets so that when we fill out the A1 report, it's correct. And so as I talk about our A1 report, it's important that your route sheet data that you submit to me matches your snapshot of your A1 report, because that's what we're looking at in our review, is to make sure that the data matches. And I'll go into a little bit more details on the review at the very end. But as far as us reviewing data, we want to make sure the data matches.
Do you have any updated route sheets? Well, it seems like the ones with forms we have are old or ancient or something.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you update those every once in a while so they're a little more user-friendly or real simple and easy to use. You know, it seems like a lot of districts start developing their own route sheets.
Yeah. So the State Board of Education has this route sheet. And, you know, it's designed to identify all the information you need for your A1 report. And so we'll talk about, there's a lot of different route sheets out there. And so this one has your time, start of route, your odometer miles at the start of your route. You have options of identifying whether it's regular ed, special ed, regular and special ed, a courtesy. Every route gets one courtesy stop, or may have one courtesy stop. An ineligible stop on the direct route, or an ineligible stop not on the direct route. And then as you put in all your stops, addresses, down here at the bottom, it will actually total your minutes for you. If you guys have, I'd recommend just, if you're using a different software, you may just want to take one of your routes and plug it into here and make sure you're getting the same totals. And even for double checking, you could put just your first stop and your last stop. Eliminate, stop 2, 3, 4, and it would do your math down here at the bottom just to verify that it's correct.
Is that an online form that's fillable?
So this is a Excel file, and I'll send it to you with all the slides that we've talked about today. I'll share that later. Should be later today. I think we had one on the website a few years ago, but I'll share this one with you guys to help.
What hazardous route would it be? It didn't show one on there. Is that ineligible direct?
So it would be ineligible. So if it's a strictly hazardous route, it would just be hazardous, ineligible, non-direct. Because the difference between a direct, we'll actually go over that in the PowerPoint. And there's a couple other ways to identify on the A1 report for funding whether it's funded or not, and we'll go over that as well.
Why is it that you have the location address as courtesy and ineligible and not an actual address? We don't have to put the address in there? Or is that just
This is just my example, so
Okay,
this would be your address of your courtesy stop,
I just
yes.
wanted to make sure. Okay, thanks.
So let's, we'll start with the PowerPoint. So supporting documents. So your documentation needs to be saved for 3 years. And we're looking to make sure you guys have a route sheet for every route that's on the A1 report. There's the ineligible zone maps. So each school has an ineligible zone. And do you guys all use maps for your ineligible zone or have those maps available on your websites? Tell me about those options you guys have.
I think Granite just has a link on our website, and that's what we send to you, because it shows all the zones for ineligible or eligible.
Okay, that's great. So there's a couple different ways you can produce those ineligible zone maps. So Granite just mentioned they send us the link to their website to where we can look at what schools. We're just trying to make sure that if we're not funding stops that are ineligible, although we do allow one courtesy stop on each route. We need a list of your bell times. We have one rule that talks about you arriving more than 5 minutes in the afternoon to your first school for efficiency. And so you want to make sure your route sheet, if it's the first school they're servicing in the afternoon, that your route sheet shows them only arriving 5 minutes early. Some scenarios you may still have your drivers line up earlier, especially when you're lining up 12 buses in a row. But funding's only paid 5 minutes up to the bell time.
Back to ineligible zone maps. If those maps are available online, what happens in a scenario like is going to happen in Jordan District this year, where they're going to realign the attendance boundaries for every single school in the district? Do we need to make hard copies of our current ineligible zone maps? So if you were to come back 2 or 3 years from now to do an audit, we would have data that would match our route, or how would you have us do that?
Yeah, I would probably talk with your IT department. They can probably back up what your website looked like at the time. So that'd be a way of documenting it if we needed that information. We also do student counts. For funding, we're looking for at least 10 regular ed students. And we're also looking at how many ineligible students versus eligible students are on your routes for the funding portion.
Can you clarify, you're looking at a percentage of those? Or just the minimum?
We want to, it's a good question, and I'm not quite there yet. So I have looked at some routes where there's a majority of ineligible students, but there's at least 10 that are regular ed students to make that qualified as a route. And they may have 1 or 2 stops that they allow ineligible students to go to that fills up a bus. And so right now I don't have any rules against it. But one of our review processes is looking at that eligible to ineligible ratio. And we want to make sure that we're being efficient.
So you're going to look at the ratio, but there's no rule. The 10 regular students is the rule.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I think kind of what I said earlier, I think our best efficiency means right now is us being shorthanded on drivers. Really makes us, a lot of districts that have allowed ineligible students to go to the nearest eligible stop. There's been a big trend this year, and districts no longer offering that. Just because of the ridership, they don't have enough drivers. We're packing buses fuller than we ever have. Yep. Okay, route maps. This year you don't have to do route maps. Route maps for when were for when we used to follow you guys on your bus routes. To me, a route map is if you have GPS and you can pull up a history of that GPS track if we needed it. It's available. As a lot of the tools that I use and looking at the route maps, I can go on Google Maps Google Earth, and I can actually type in address and stops and kind of verify information that, when this originally came out, we weren't able to do. So you need to be able to still produce a map if we need it. As we review routes, we're looking for a few different things. One is we're looking for the ineligible stops, trying to make sure that they're not listed as being a funded stop if they're within the 1.5 miles. There's a few ways we can do that. If the route is tricky and we can't understand it, even with using Google Maps, we would request a map from you guys. But so far with our reviews this year, we have not had to request any maps. Okay, route sheets must include a route number. This route number must be unique from every route. If it's not, you're not going to be funded for every route that you can. Bus number. Bus number needs to be different for your extended school year. This was a mistake that I found on some of the reviews. We're paying minutes per day for inspection, and the summer school runs need to, for example, if the bus number is 202, you'd make it 202 EY for extended school year, so that you're funded for those inspection minutes during the school year, because it's going to be looking for the max number of days run, and it's going to pay on that max number of days run for that bus number. So summer school is the only different number you should have, just some way of identifying it's for extended school year, so that you are getting those inspection minutes. Okay, we want to know where the bus is at the start of every route. Calculating your dead minutes, we need to know where it started from. We need the number of stops, or number of the stop, and the address of the stop.
I have a question on the extended school year, but for the school year, you mentioned before where a bus route, you may have it run 44 days or out of the 180. Does that need to have a different number as well? Or where that's in the school year? Because you're saying extended school year, you want to put EY in there, but if you have one bus that's doing a 44-day route, like we have them for our Wednesday route in Logan School District, we do a totally different route on Wednesday because they start late, but the rest of the week's the same. So we do submit that as a different route. Does that need to have a different number?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
So the A1 report is looking for the max days run, and I'll show you an example on where to find that. So I'll play with that just to verify that.
So the route number is definitely different, but the bus number needs to be different too. Just so I'm clear.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that each bus is getting the 178 days of inspection minutes, and so I'll manipulate the A1 report just to verify that when we get to it.
Now, our AM routes and PM routes we number differently because they're not run exactly the same in the AM as they are in the PM.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have is the bus numbers are the same in the AM and the PM though.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that going to be a problem?
No.
Even with his, if you did A for your morning, B for your afternoon, if he did a C for his Wednesday, you could use that same bus number.
Right.
Because it's not going to be overlapping your 180 days or whatever that is.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, I was just going to do 20W for Wednesday.
So do I need to, for my AM, use an A and a PM use a P on that bus number?
A and B is what we use.
Okay. Because we've never done that part, so we've probably been shorted our.
But don't
So it's
trip once a day though?
Maybe there's 2 miles out and you don't pick them up on AM, but you take them home, A route, B route, and it would be different minutes and different miles.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
true.
But if you have a different person, from what he's saying, a different person driving it, let's say a noon run.
So the,
You may use that same bus 3 times in a day.
that's a good point.
The purpose of,
Right.
Yeah, so if you're running a 20A and a 20B and it's still bus 20, then it's doubling the pre-trip minutes. So if it's the same bus morning and afternoon, use the same bus number. If it's different through the week, so if it's in the same day, use the same bus number. If it's same route but different day, like you're doing 4 days of this route, 1 day of this route, then you'll need to distinguish because you're only getting the 30 minutes of inspection per day.
So what if you're using it for 3 routes in a day?
That's fine. Use the same bus number because
And different drivers, so they're
Yeah.
tripping themselves because they are responsible for that bus and that it's been pre-tripped. And
so yeah, we pay 30 minutes per day per bus. So even if you have a morning driver and afternoon driver and they're still pre-tripping, we're only paying 30 in that scenario. Yeah.
Route 10A is your morning, 10B is your afternoon, C might be your Wednesday, but they're all in bus 22.
Right.
Yeah, like we have 4 route numbers for any given.
But one bus they can go
Correct.
Right, and that's where I wanted to clarify, because I have one driver running a noon route, but she is using a different driver's bus, and she pre-trips that bus
Right.
because
So you
she's
should get-
responsible for that.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know if we had to maybe reassign her a new bus, but that's gonna be miles on that bus if we're having her do that.
Yeah.
But I don't wanna show her, and I don't wanna show
Okay. So we want the total number of eligible and ineligible students at the stop. We want the odometer reading at each stop, or the mileage between each stop. For me, it's a little easier with the odometer because the way I do the math is calculating the beginning to the end and the beginning of the load where our bus becomes loaded to the end where it becomes unloaded. So that's a little easier for me in doing the math rather than adding up the distance between every stop. It creates a little bit more. I'm seeing more math errors when you're adding 10 numbers together versus the beginning and ending. And you want to identify the arrival time at each school and the time at the end of each route. Okay, layovers. Layovers is your time between 2 consecutive or 3 consecutive routes. We want to make sure that our layover times aren't counted twice. So if you drop off high school on one route sheet, the next route sheet would start at the high school. And so you're not counting it twice. If we match up those, it's one synchronous route. Okay, route sheet rules. If the route zeroes out, which means that all the students are off of the bus, you should divide this into 2 routes. For 2 routes, the bus is to go to the first stop without pit stops. For from routes, the bus is allowed to get to the first school 5 minutes before the bell rings to be eligible for funding. If you arrive earlier, you would count those minutes as ineligible. Here's our ineligible courtesy stops. By law, the first stop for regular ed students in the ineligible zone that is on the direct path to or from the school will be a courtesy stop and will still receive funding. This is something each district does differently. A lot of districts don't provide a courtesy stop, and only are transporting students that are eligible. So this is something that you're funded for if you only add one stop on the direct route to school in that ineligible zone.
So what if our route is just one stop? So we have, like, one example, we have West High. So West High School, we do a regular route, but then we have a full bus full of students that's just inside the 1.5 miles to the school, and this is right in the route to that elementary school. And so would that count as a one courtesy stop to receive funding for that school?
So if I understand you correctly, you have a partially filled bus, and your last stop you fill it up, or you make an additional
So
trip?
we dropped off all the kids at West High School, and then we're going to Backman Elementary School, and so we just are picking up this busload of kids at an apartment complex, 1.4 miles from the school. Can that be counted as a courtesy?
No, because the routes wouldn't be considered a funded route based on the number of eligible students.
Right, because there's zero eligible.
Right.
Okay, thank
Yep. So additional stops for regular ed students in the ineligible zone are on the direct path to and from school. Should have 2 minutes each subtracted from the loaded miles column and put into the ineligible minutes column. This has been a common mistake as I'm doing reviews, and for me it's always easier to engineer something to get good results than to have a big process. And so as I've just going through the A1 reports, this is a big section that has not been done. So we're putting 2 minutes on the A1 column, and I'll show you where that is, but we're not subtracting from the loaded. So I'm hoping in the future that we get it updated to where you just put the number of ineligible stops on the direct route and have the report, which is in Excel that does math, actually do the math for you. That would be a lot more simple. So for now, if you have ineligible stops, subtract 2 minutes for each stop. And then let's talk about, this is a duplicate, sorry. Let's talk about our non-direct ineligible stops. The idea behind this is any going off track of your route, we want to account for every minute and mile that you go to pick up ineligible students and report that as ineligible for funding. And so there's a couple ways to do that. One is to simply do what I just said, is if you depart from your main route 0.2 of a mile to pick up students and go back, you account for that time and those 0.4 of a mile. The other way is to calculate the miles and minutes from the last eligible stop to the school and put this into the loaded minutes and miles column. And then calculate the minutes and miles from the last eligible stop to the ineligible stop and then back to the school and calculate the difference between the two. And then input that difference in the ineligible miles and minutes column, and again subtract those minutes from your loaded minutes. And I'll add that to the slide here.
So we can do either one, because my experience is it doesn't take a full 2 minutes for, you know what I mean? We've always deducted the 2 minutes for those stops, but when we actually figure out the time, it doesn't take us 2 minutes for those 2 stops each. You know what I mean?
So that's
They're two different, direct and non-direct. Correct?
So this one says calculate the minutes between the two. So direct, you would deduct 2 minutes. And as I've gone through like trainings over the last 10 years, we've had deduct 1 minute written down. The latest is 2, so I'm sticking with 2. That's another decision that our Transportation Advisory Committee is going to be looking at. And, 2 minutes when you pick up 30 kids is not generous enough. But if you're picking up just 1 or 2 students in an ineligible zone, 2 minutes is excessive. So it's I think 2 minutes is good and bad for different situations. Okay, do you guys have any other questions on route sheets?
I have a question. What do you recommend as a good source of documentation if we did get an extended review? We had brought up in a director's meeting someone saying, well, we have a routing software, and it's a guess. It's what the routing software is guessing. We have GPS, which is an actual, this is what took place, and we have a driver who's saying this is the way it is. Which do you prefer as a state that we use for that documentation so that we have the most accurate backup documentation for your review?
So the review of your route sheet to your A1 report is we're making sure that things are reported correctly. One of the changes that I'm looking at is to actually come out and see how the data collection is taking place. And so whether, for me, it's, are we within reason? For instance, if I don't know, so the best documentation, I think GPS shows you what the bus did that morning, and is
Perfect.
perfect
So
data,
I keep a GPS readout of what I supported on that sheet that's submitted to you. That's great documentation in my word. Yeah?
Yeah.
Good.
I think the route, even the route sheet, not everybody has GPS. The route sheet could be sufficient. This is what we got on that day we did it. Part of my review process is to open up on-site visits and actually check on the data collection. And so, depending on if Chris, you have GPS, I'm going to say, give me the route sheet for bus 20 and pull the GPS for its track this morning. Let's make sure that we're close.
Well, I would have to pull that GPS on the day that I document because it's a one-day shot.
Right. So that, or you'd be able to just explain that, I know routes change daily, and so if it's different, is there a reason why it's different, and that would be sufficient for me. We could pull the exact date when the route sheet was created, but they change. So if you give me an updated route sheet and we pulled what it's doing, it tells me you're gathering the data correctly.
In Wasatch, we have pulled the GPS sheet from the day we submit. So what you get, we have documented that, and we keep that for the 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, I guess for retaining that information, that'd be good to have it all match what you submitted. That makes sense.
I was just questioning, you don't have on here anything about the student count on ineligible, but you are supposed to also move the students that are ineligible to the ineligible column, correct?
So we pick up 6 students ineligible at this top?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Just clarifying.
Great if you could make those feed into our A-run report and we just fill that out.
Database.
Yeah.
It could just fill out your route sheet and have it populate your A1 report.
Yes.
And I can set up to have it look for any outliers, any data that doesn't look correct. Stops are closer than 0.3 of a mile apart, provide a reason why. There's so many things that it could just be. I'm excited for it.
Seems like it'd be more consistent statewide than what everybody's gathering.
Yeah. Yep. I see it's progressing. Okay. Okay, let's talk about our A1 report columns. I think the hardest part is our data entry because we're collecting data from our bus drivers, we're collecting data from our secretaries, from our our routing software, from all our mapping systems, and we're trying to get them all accurate and then submitted into our A1 report. These slides should look familiar. These are a past presentation I broke down into just the A1 report form. Let's see. And I think for this, I'll just open up the A1 report and we can go through the slides and I can show you the columns. If you guys have any questions, let me know. This is an example of an A1 report. This year I sent you guys a blank report. And the first step was to type your district name, number, and I think the year into the report, and then it would automatically populate columns A and B. If you had a couple districts asked me, we've started late with our review process, so we have not sent you guys a report with any of last year's information, and we're still working on that right now. And so some of this previous audit or previous year numbers aren't in there, and we'll be providing you guys with that information as soon as we can. All right, on our A1 report, we want to make sure we don't have any blank cells. So if there's 0 students, please put a 0 rather than just leaving blanks. And we will have you guys fill out columns 1 through 26. All the extra columns are all formulas. It's important to see column 35 here. This is the green column, and green is because it's showing that these routes are eligible for full funding. It will change to red when you're only eligible for half funding or not eligible for funding. If you use our route sheet, it had some highlighted colors at the bottom for totals. Those actually match up with the highlighted columns on this A1 report, the light and dark browns, and our ineligible miles and minutes. Okay. So I'm on the second page. So column 1 and 2 come from the summary, filling out these top 3 cells. Your driver name or ID. This one doesn't have any driver's names, but if you can put a driver name or ID number, and I realize this changes throughout the year. Column 4, this is your bus number, and just a reminder that your extended school year buses need to be a different bus number. Our route number should be different than all our other routes and should match our route sheet. Column 6, this is our route schedule, and we only have a few options. We have a to or from or mixed. A mixed would be our scenario when you're picking up students the same time you're dropping students off in your route. Column 7. This is our, says single or double or 0. So single will be a route that's just run once a day. If you're running the same route twice, you would change this to 2, and it would automatically do the math to double the miles and minutes for that route because you're doing it now twice a day. If you guys put a 0 here, it changes your eligible annual miles and minutes to 0. So if you have a route that is not funded under our rules and laws, you want to keep track of your mileage on this report, you want to make sure that you have a 0 in column 7. So some of the scenarios where you would have a 0 is if you had any type of school of choice. It's non-to and from school transportation. Outside of school, like PE. So if you have a sports team practice off campus, or have swim team where you would have several high schools go to one high school for swim practice. You'd want to put a 0 there because that does not fall in line with our funding rules. If you have a route that's all preschool kids, preschool, other than our students with IEPs with the transportation plan, you're going to want to put a 0 on this column. And if you guys have concerns about programs that you're running that you feel should be funded, let me know so that I can get the information to our Transportation Advisory Committee.
What if you have a golf team that is practicing, but they are taking those kids home? They're using an MPV, but they're returning those kids home after practice, so that would be a from, and it is eligible kids from the school. But they're taking them to their bus stop at night.
Okay.
After. How does that one work?
So that would be...
And it is definitely, it's a 5-day a week.
Okay.
After school.
Yeah, so we do, under law, we do approve a late run.
Okay.
We would not approve the...
It's 9-passenger vehicle, so they're hauling 7 to 8 passengers, 7 passengers, 5 days a week,
Yeah.
for 2 months.
Right. So we would not pay for transportation to their event.
Correct.
That one I'll have to think about a little bit. But under a late run, if they ran back to the school, some of the kids would drive home and you do the late run.
They drive right past the high school to go home, but they don't actually stop there and start again.
So we would take, I imagine we would take the distance from the school,
to the golf course.
right, would be considered your late run for your after-school activity.
Does the late run have to have 10 students on it?
Ours does. We've always said that.
It would still have to meet the funding requirements. So at least 4 students for half funding. If you're using a multi-purpose vehicle, it would fall in line with all the rules. Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, column 8 is type of route. This is where you identify what type of school you're servicing. We have our vocational school, which is eligible for funding. We have a late start, early out. We have after school. This would be our late run. Our extended school year, and then we have one for other. other would be used for your ineligible runs. There may also be a couple that of the other programs. We mentioned like a special ed program where they attend a school more than at least half of their school day outside of their regular attendance program. So you would also could get funding there. Just the difference is you would have on this single or double, you would have a 1 rather than a 0. 0 is for your ineligible funded routes. Column 9 is what schools you're servicing on that bus route. Column 10 is our bus capacity. We utilize the bus capacity numbers to identify how full the buses are. If you look on columns, by the way, there's a plus sign here. I think it's actually protected, but if you want to see how full your buses are based on our spreadsheet, I can unlock that section for you guys, but it tells you your percent of capacity, or your total riders, and your total, what percentage of your bus has your ineligible riders. We have column 11 is what type of bus. And then we have our data entry from our route sheets. We have our loaded minutes per route, loaded miles per route, our dead minutes per route, and our dead miles per route. Column 16 is our days run. This number here, we should be able to match up with your school calendar. If your school kids have a 178-day school year, that's the number that should be here. That's what we're checking. From our route sheets again, we have our number of stops, and we have our student counts. Our regular ed, our eligible regular ed, how many are actually riding, our disabled, how many wheelchairs we have, and then our ineligible students, courtesy and hazardous students, or hazard student stops, how many are joining. Column 24 and 25, this is where the numbers we put in column 24 and 25, if we have an indirect stop and we subtract 4 minutes and 4/10 of a mile, we're going to go back to our loaded minutes and miles and make sure we deduct that 4 minutes and 4/10 of a mile from our loaded miles a minute section here. Column 26, this is for you guys. This is any types of notes. As we go through the reports and find things that are weird, we would hope that we find some type of comment in this box. If it's, for instance, if it's considered another program and is requested for funding, we'd like to see that this is a special ed program where students attend this school for half of their day and meets the route requirements. You can type as much as you want in this box, and we can actually expand this section to read what notes you have for each route. Do you guys have any other questions as far as filling this section out? Okay.
Ron, I have a quick question.
Uh-huh.
I didn't quite grasp the column 5, the scenario where you'd put a 0 on there, as opposed to just like the swim team. You're taking the swim team to practice at night.
Yeah.
Is that even a route?
That's happening.
That's happening.
Is that a route? What's it? When would you put it on here as a 0, and when would you not put it on there and say that's just a athletic?
The A1 report can account for all of your I'd say regular route miles. And routes can be eligible or ineligible. And so if you have a schedule and you want to, as part of your prediction, this A1 report, put down that you're taking your swim team 40 days a school year to practice, you could put a 40-day route and put a 0. And
would it also be acceptable to just put those miles in the
you could log
activity
those
trip miles on Schedule C and
Yeah.
leave them off of A?
Yep,
That
you
would be
could
acceptable.
you could keep your
But
log
if we
of your
wanted to
activity
track
trips
it, then we'd
and
put it on here.
field trips there.
And then I had one other question. On the actual count for the students, that's obviously a snapshot within this snapshot.
Yeah.
Does that number affect funding or affect any of the review that you're looking at of utilization or efficiency or anything that?
No, so we're looking, the bottom line is we're looking for the rules that make a funded route. And so we're looking for at least 10 regular ed students. Ultimately, there's when our legislators look at this report, they want to see that our buses are full. And that's always hard for us in transportation because we've learned that being efficient doesn't always mean our buses is full. We may have only 40 minutes between school A and school B, and we can't extend our route beyond 40 minutes or we have kids late to school, so we only bring in a 30% full bus. And so there's other challenges. As far as funding goes, we're not looking at that as determining how you're funded, because we realize that there's other factors that are involved. Efficient doesn't always mean your bus is completely full, although it helps to be completely full whenever you can. The second page is our summary tab. We have a red button here, push to run the macro. This calculates all your inspection minutes. And then as you click that button, it's going to look for every bus number you have. And it's going to identify the max day run for each bus. And that's what your inspection minutes are going to be funded at. So again, if you have a extended school year bus, you're going to have to label it as a different bus number because it's looking for the max day run of all the routes on your route sheet, on your A1 report. And so in this case, it only funds up to the 180 days on this example. And if you had 10 days of extended school year with the same bus number, it would fall within the 180 days. And so you wouldn't be funded for those inspection minutes.
Is that the same with our early outs then? We have a Wednesday early out, and you have to give that bus number like something on the end of it, like bus 102W.
So your bus number each bus number should get the same number of inspection minutes of your school year, or be funded for that many days of your school year. So you want to double check that if you do have an early out that has a different route sheet, that it's identified so that when we look at the inspection, we've got bus 61 funded for 100 days and 78 days funded under that other route. It's kind of confusing.
Hey, Ron, to clarify, each bus only gets one inspection per day, right? So if you have a bus that has different drivers, different routes 2 times a day, you'd still use the same bus number.
Yeah, you're not being funded any extra because you're having different drivers do morning or afternoon runs. Yeah.
So going back to the A1, so these are really runs.
Yes.
So like one route would have a run AM to school and then a run PM home. I guess I'm wondering about the vocational So if we have a run from the high school to our vocational site, that should be one line.
Yes.
And there's another line to take them back, right? Just like, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to double check that.
Yep.
So now, on vocational, would, like a robotics program, would that qualify as a vocational program?
Is it held at a vocational school?
It is off-site. They have it, it's a specialty thing where they're doing their robotics group and the junior high wants to come and participate. We said we don't have transportation, but I'm sure they would be really excited if we could fund a route.
So I would say that that's probably more of a club rather than a school. So a vocational school in that scenario.
I'll let them know that then.
Okay. Yeah, so it would be a non-funded.
The high school kids just drive themselves, so it's not a big deal. But
Mhm.
the junior high would like participate.
Yeah.
And they do go on activities. So they want to, with the swords or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
That's why they want it.
Down here at the bottom on our summary tab, this is our self-auditing tools. We're looking for buses that are utilized more than 12 routes a day. We're looking for buses that are being used for more than 450 minutes a day. Alert if route miles exceed 50 miles an hour, which can happen. Alert if route miles are under 8 miles, which happens in city districts. Alert if days run max is more than 180. Alert if max miles per hour is above 30. Alert minimum miles per hour of 4. These are just basic tools. You should be able to look at your routes and identify, yes, this route does go faster because it has 3 stops and it goes on the highway for a certain period of time. Okay? As I go back to my A1 report, it highlights routes with numbers that are outside of my parameters. So in this case, I have total daily miles is only 1.8 miles. As long as my eligible kids are in elementary and my stops are 1.5 miles from the school, this is highlighted in red to alert me, but in this notes column I would put, this is an eligible stop that picks up students outside of the school 1.5 miles and only goes 1.8 miles into school. Okay? If we look right here, total daily miles 149.5, and my bus is going 128 miles an hour.
Can the natural bus do that?
So I've seen buses go faster. So in this scenario, we want to find out why. I'm going back to, oh, you know what? This wasn't supposed to be 128. This was supposed to be 12.8. And as soon as I make that correction, miles per hour is back to 29. Okay? These tools are to help you guys identify mistakes or have a reason why you're outside of that parameter. Okay? You know, in this case I've got one that's 31, but it has a lot of highway miles. Okay. Do you guys have any questions on the A1 report? Thanks, Martin. Okay, this is our last portion. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the changes that are occurring. For years, we've done reviews on transportation. And this year, as I looked at kind of what was done in the past, I really felt that for a couple reasons, I needed to do a baseline with all the districts. Our reviews, we want to ensure the A1 report accuracy. We want to make sure that we have sufficient documentation. Ultimately, we report to our public. We need to make sure that we can document everything we're doing. I also wanted to be able to identify what errors we're finding and actually provide training so we correct those errors. And also to create best practices, make improvements to forms, to different procedures we have within transportation. So our review process, I'm creating a base review for every district. It'll be our initial review. It's 5 routes from every district. As I looked in the past, there were years that districts were not being reviewed. And for me, it makes more sense to have just a small basic review to understand what districts are doing and to be able to help correct problems. Our review process, we look at our A1 report and we look for any of those outliers, the red flags, the buses that are going over 100 miles an hour. And we're trying to find out, those ones are going to be picked initially, things that we could see problems with. Ultimately, our review can make funding adjustments. If we find things that are in error, we'll let you guys know. We'll send a letter to you guys so that you can review our findings and provide feedback.
Can I ask a question on that one?
Uh-huh.
So you're doing 5 routes for each district, right?
Yes.
So if you have, say, 20 routes, you're going to be at a fourth of your route will be audited.
Yes.
Where if you have, say, 100 routes, you're going to be at a much lower percentage. The Highway Patrol, when they do inspections on buses in the springtime, they do a percentage based on the fleet size. Have you considered that?
I did, but in the case of a small district, if you only have 6 routes, I would only be reviewing 1. And part of my goal is, I think 5 routes is a good number to give me an idea of how districts are doing. For me, this review process, this is reviewing the submitted data, and I think it's only a portion of the review process. And I think it's fair for me to have a baseline. What does this district need help with? What do I need to focus training on? And that allows me to get to know every district with that 5 route review. And I know it, but the idea is, the things we're looking for with our 5 route review, or we're looking for at the route sheets. We're trying to make sure that we have our stop placement, that our stops are that are being requested for funding or eligible for funding. We're looking at our school placement. We want to make sure that our stops aren't transporting students to school of choice. We're looking at our odometer readings. We're looking at our student eligibility. And we want to make sure that as much as we can, does the route meet the safety, economy, and efficiency. Once we do 5 routes from every district, we have the option of doing a secondary review, which would be 10% or a max of 60 routes. And so this, if our route review, our initial review shows that we only have 40 or 20% accuracy, that would tend to bring us to look at a more in-depth review. The other portion to that, if when we get our summary reports and you're above or below that 5%, obviously we need to find out why, and so that may also flag for, if we can't get a good explanation of why things are above or below that 5%, that could also flag for a secondary review. The next part is actually doing an on-site visits with you guys. And part of this is I'm planning to do some training, some consulting. This would also review some of this, how you sample your, how you collect your data. There's different techniques. It depends if you have GPS for collecting data for the routes. Part of my job description in the national standards is to provide oversight to districts, and I don't feel that that's really been done in the past to the extent that it should. So our data collection process, part of the review would be using your driver Z form and actually let's pull the driver records for these drivers and make sure that you're reporting accurate information on drivers. Let's make sure the training records are up to date. And again, I would only need to do a small sample. Unless I find a lot of problems, then we need to make a goal, corrective action goal to get things back on track. How do you guys show me the process where you account for all the miles you run for activity trips? It could be something simple as a spreadsheet that you're tracking with. Just different ways that I can, if you're tracking it by hand and on paper and pencil, I hope to be able to provide a spreadsheet that other districts are using. And so I think it's good to, I consider myself to more be of a consultant or provide training as you guys need it. And even down to just reviewing some bus records. Make sure that we're getting buses serviced timely as part of my oversight. We talk about communication. I want to be pretty open with you guys. If I find a problem, we'd make suggestions or goals with you guys. We want to try to clarify things or have justifications for things that we're finding. Okay, that's it. You guys have any other questions on the review process?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I do have just one more quick announcement. I've still got quite a big stack of these Safety Week posters. If your district hasn't grabbed a stack to bring home and distribute to your schools or hang on your buses, please grab some. And then I also have, I've got a Girl Scout who is doing a project for Pledge to Start Seeing Red. I printed some with her business card, and I've got some blank forms, but it's just a little program for stopping for school buses that has been, I think this is a girl in Davis County who has started this program. I just found out about it and wanted to promote it statewide for her. So I'm glad that a lot of our concerns are being brought up by other entities and are helping us keep our kids safe. So come grab some of these and the posters here. Thanks.